I want to welcome you to today's webinar. We're going to talk a little bit about payments for the Engine Development Awards. And this is a joint presentation with the new directorate TIP. That's kind of a mouthful, so I'm going to just talk about the Innovation and Technology Ecosystems Division, and which is where the Engines program resides. And we've got two divisions from the Office of Budget Finance and Award Management. And one is the Division of Acquisition and Cooperative Support, and the other is the Division of Financial Management. Next slide. So today we're going to be talking about a number of items. I'm only going to spend about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to turn this over to my colleague from BFA. We're going to start with just an overview, set the context, because some of this information you may not have seen to date. And then my colleague Justin from the Division of Financial Management is going to talk a bit about general payment information, the ACMS payment process overview, and then some common processing issues or things that you want to be aware of. And of course, we're going to open it up for Q&A. So we've arranged this to spend about 30 minutes sharing the presentation and about an hour to answer all of your questions. Next slide. So getting started, as I mentioned, some of this may be new to you, and not all of it has been worked out. So this is a nice preview. We will be using cooperative agreements as the award vehicle for the Engine Development Awards. What does this mean? It means substantial involvement. So we'll be spending some time together, NSF and recipients, through multiple types of interactions, and that's what cooperative agreements allow us. Some of the rest of this is in the NSF PAPPG, but in case you haven't read that in detail, I do want to highlight just a couple of things so you remember. When you accept an award, of course, you have an obligation to use the funds or the property, if there were any, in accordance with the terms and conditions of the award. These may not have been distributed yet, but we will talk about a couple around the payments. We can make payments in advance of work performed, or as reimbursements for work performed and cost incurred by the grantee. However, payments can't be made prior to making an award that's signed by the NSF Grants and Agreements Officer. So that's the only official at NSF that can obligate funds. Next slide. So this is something new for probably everyone has not seen this today. And this is where we're headed with the term and condition. And this relates to payments. So if you've had NSF awards, this may be new to you. But what this means is there will be incremental payments made over the 2-year performance period. We anticipate about a $250,000 advance payment to get the work started, followed by 2 subsequent payments, approximately $250,000 each. And then, of course, the remainder of the funds will be split between the two. The first is about a $25,000 increment, and then the balance minus the $25,000. So you may see when you're reading this that these payments will be linked to interim reports. So I'm just going to take a minute here because this will be new information for the bulk of the group. And if you're not sure when we talk about payments, or I've thrown some terms out there at the bottom, I've dropped in the definitions from the NSF PAPPG. Next slide. So terms and conditions. So I mentioned interim report, but there are a couple others, and all of these are related in the fact that we won't release funding until these documents are submitted and approved by the cognizant program director. So the interim report, the annual final and outcomes report, all are required to be approved before funding is released. So I'm just touching on the highlights here. The actual term and condition, we break that quite a bit, but we wanted to spend the time in this webinar on ACMS. So I'm just going to highlight some of the components of that. The interim reports are going to cover a 6-month period. We anticipate that they'll be due no later than the 5th day of the first month in the following 6-month period. It's going to include items such as staffing, various plans that we've specified, and metrics against performance. Again, the term and condition will actually be broken out and have more details. But the focus of today is we want you to understand the relationship between the projected term and condition and how that relates to payments, and then how that will occur in the system. There will be an annual report, and that's going to be, most of you, if you've had an award by NSF will know this, no later than 30 days prior to the end of the current budget period. This may overlap partially or may be substituted with the interim report. And then, of course, the final report and outcomes report. The latter is oriented for the general public, and that's due no later than 120 days following the end of the date of the agreement. So that's a lot to take in. I'll pause here for a minute. Next slide. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn this over. I wanted to set the context so you understand why we're showing you information on the award cash management service. Turning this conversation over to my colleague from the Budget Finance and Award Management Office at NSF, Mr. Justin Pohl.
Thank you, Florence. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm Justin Pohl. I'm the section chief of our Payments and Outreach section within the Payments and Analytics branch within the Division of Financial Management. And our branch is primarily responsible for processing all of our grant and commercial payment operations, performing financial analytics, and some of our portfolio monitoring and compliance, along with our stakeholder outreach responsibilities. I would like to introduce you to our award cash management service. If you're a first-time grant recipient, you may not be familiar with our payment system, but this is our approach to the award payments and post-award financial process. This has been in place since April of 2013, and ACMS provides service to over 2,500 institutions, which would include small businesses and individuals. Through ACMS, we collect disbursement information at an award level. And as a result, we eliminated the collection of the SF 425 Federal Financial Report at NSF, but we do have a couple other annual reporting initiatives that collect some supplemental missing pieces that ACMS doesn't collect. And this would include program income as an example. To access ACMS, it's available from your research.gov dashboard after you've logged in, either from the Manage Financials dropdown or from the Manage Financials tile that you would find within the dashboard, as seen here with these screenshots. You do require ACMS user permissions. ACMS user permissions are not granted by default if you are initiating the setup of your institution for the first time. Once an award has been made and your institution has been identified as an ACMS using organization, you will be permitted to assign or approve ACMS user roles. Just a couple reminders here, each user is required to have a unique ID. We only want one account per user, and you cannot set up group user accounts and passwords for multiple people within an office. More information about setting up users and adding permissions can be found on the About Account Management information page, which is available through the link at the bottom of the research.gov page, and it's also been posted in the webinar chat. A comprehensive overview of a lot of our key and common questions that we receive through payment operations, we maintain in this comprehensive FAQ document that can be downloaded from our DFM website. I provide a couple links here. This is a 16-page document that covers a lot of topics around ACMS and general cash management, any critical dates involving the year end, some basic information about program income reporting and our monitoring activities, as well as some specific questions concerning some programs like SBIR and fellowship. Again, I would recommend that you either bookmark this or take a look at it to familiarize yourself with the post-award financial matters. Next, I'm going to give an overview of the ACMS payment process. We wanted to spend some time informing the audience of a typical timeline, since your payments are going to be released based on the submission and approval of interim or annual progress reports. It's important to understand that the payment will not be available the day after you submit the report. The submission of the report is not the action that's going to trigger the release of the next payment. It's after your project director, your program director has reviewed the interim report and approved it, that they will have the operations manager within the division update the ACMS threshold. And you can see on here that there is a certain time frame that the PD is going to have up to 10 days to review and approve that report. They will pass that information along to the operations manager. They could take up to 3 days to update the ACMS threshold. And once that threshold has been updated, you as the grant recipient will be able to log into ACMS and submit your transaction request. It's important to then understand the transaction will be processed based on the payment date that is requested. We within DFM will review all transactions that were received and processed from the following day or from the former day. We then we bundle those together and transmit those payments after we've approved them to the Department of Treasury for disbursement. And the Treasury could take 1 to 2 business days for dispersing that to your bank. And so the total duration of this timeline from the submission of your interim report to when those funds are dispersed to your bank account could realistically take 15 to 20 days. And we just want everybody to be familiar and understand that timeline. To create a payment transaction, once you've logged in and accessed the Award Cash Management Service, there's going to be an option listed as Submit New Transaction. It will default to the day that you're logging in as the default payment date requested. However, you have the ability to request a payment for a future date where the system will warehouse and hold that request until the date that you've requested it. If you want it to be immediately processed, I recommend that you just leave that date as the default. Once the transaction has been created, you'll be taken to the Step 1 Payments tab, which is where you'll find all of your active awards listed as being available for a payment request. You'll see here some basic information about it. I have scrubbed this particular screenshot to not include PII information, but you'll see that the award ID will be listed, the PI name, the period of performance, award start date, award end date, as well as the total funds authorized and any previous cumulative disbursements that have been made, and then showing what your remaining balance is. If you have a particular account number within your own financial system, within your own organization that you wish to crosswalk this information with, we do allow you to enter that in the recipient account number field, but that field is optional and you are not required to utilize that. Once you have entered in your payment amount requested, you can then navigate further by clicking on the next tab itself. For most of you will probably be able to skip the adjustments tab for now. If you have multiple awards and if an award has recently closed, you do have the ability to adjust what had been reported as your final expenditure amount through this adjustments tab. But this tab is only utilized for closed awards in which you need to adjust what the final payment amount was, whether you need additional funds or whether you're returning funds. And we just require that a justification be added in to explain why the payment request is being submitted late. Some other limitations that I just like to make everybody aware of when there are adjustments to financially closed awards is the transaction total must always be greater to or equal to 0. We do not take a net negative transaction total. If you have no award, if you're doing like a return on a closed award, and you don't have another award to offset that return to make the transaction total either 0 or positive, you would need to do the remittance outside of the system, which I will cover that in just a moment. And individual award requests must be greater to or equal to $1 plus or minus $1. Upward adjustments, which is we could refer to as additional payments, are available for 14 additional months after the financial closure. And downward adjustments, or which could be referred to as returns or remittances, are available until the funding appropriation has canceled. The exception to these timelines are if the underlying funding appropriation does cancel, the 14 months could be shorter. Once you have completed the step 1 and step 2 of the transaction, you will be taken to, or you can click on to the step 3 Submit and Certify tab, where you'll be presented with a summary of your payment request. And you'll be asked to attest to or certify this certification statement, which is based on the terms and conditions. So you would just need to check the checkbox and click certify and submit the transaction. If you, within your organization, have the roles and responsibilities segregated out to different individuals, you could have a preparer of the transaction who could prepare this in the system and simply forward it for certification, and then you could have a separate certifier come in and review the transaction and actually do the certification and submit to NSF. We don't require that segregation of duties to be performed in our system. We do recommend it as a best practice that there is always a preparer and a certifier, somebody reviewing the request. But we recognize some organizations do that internal control at their organization outside of our system. And so if that control is being done outside of the system, the same person could prepare and certify and submit the transaction within our system. I'd just like to make that clear as well. We do provide a series of standard reports. You can view historical transactions to take a look at what had previously been submitted. You can look at details for the specific award, all the way down to the amendment and split detail level. So if the award has been received funding in multiple increments, you can see that level of detail within ACMS and how the expenditures have been applied to the various amendments. You can view a listing of all of your open or active awards, or you can view a listing of recently closed awards within the last 18 months. And you can perform an advanced transaction or award search if you have the specific ACMS transaction number or award number and you wanted to get right to that specific item. Now I would like to cover some common processing issues. Here's a listing of the various transaction statuses that ACMS has. It's important to understand that if a transaction is left in the draft or awaiting certification status, we will not take action on it as an agency. We do not consider draft or awaiting certification statuses to be fully submitted to us for processing. So sometimes folks will get in there and partially prepare and complete the transaction and leave it in one of these statuses, and then will contact us in a week wondering why they hadn't received their payment. And so it's important to understand that we do not take action on the actual transaction until it has been certified. And once it's been submitted and certified, it will be cataloged in a received status. And that means we will then process it during the next batch processing. Once the batch processing has been kicked off for a particular transaction, it will move into a pending status while it's awaiting feedback from our financial system. And once it's been successfully interfaced with the financial system, it will either receive an accepted or a partially accepted transaction status. Partially accepted means that a particular line item on the transaction may have not interfaced successfully. If there is a reason why we need to review the transaction, it may go into an interim NSF review status, which will require one of my staff to take a look at it and approve it before it will process further. And again, if you request a payment date into the future, other than today, or the day that you're actually processing it, it will go into warehouse status until that date. And of course, transactions can be canceled within a certain window of time. I also want to just bring up the fact that these awards are going to be utilizing award thresholds. Award thresholds will be visible on the award details screen. And when a threshold is active, you'll see this red active box, and you'll be able to see what the threshold has been set at, whether it's limiting your request to the first $250,000, or as interim reports are approved, this amount will be increased to accommodate and allow further payment requests. I want to also reiterate what Florence had indicated earlier, that the program office will be responsible for updating those award thresholds once the additional payments have been approved for release based on the approval of the interim progress report. Sometimes there might be delays to the payment. If you put a remark in the NSF Remarks section on the Summary tab, the Certify and Submit tab, it will automatically trigger an NSF review, because those are intended to be remarks that somebody at NSF needs to take a look at and potentially take action on. And so the only way for us to guarantee that one of our staff is able to take a look at those remarks is we will funnel anytime a remark is added through the NSF review queue. And that could add an additional business day or two to the overall timeline for processing. The other item that is a common delay is when an organization allows their SAM registration to expire. So I'm going to go into that just a little bit further in detail. So you have two comment boxes on the Certify and Submit tab. You have an internal comments, which is intended for any notes you wish to leave to help your organization identify the purpose of the transaction, and the remarks should only be used to communicate information directly to NSF. If you utilize the remarks, it will go into the NSF review queue. And again, every recipient of an award from NSF is required to maintain an active SAM registration. This is where we collect your identity information, including banking information. So if you allow your SAM registration to expire, it needs to be recertified annually. If it does expire, any payment transactions that are submitted will automatically be placed on hold until that registration is reactivated. And so this is an area that can be a common delay for folks. A little bit more detail about partially accepted transactions. If you have more than one award and you're requesting payments on more than one award, as in this example, if there are 5 awards for a total of $125,000, if we have experienced an issue interfacing one of those awards, we will go ahead and process the awards we can, and only delay or not process the one that caused a problem. And so in this example, if you received a reduced payment, it could be because one of the awards failed the interface, and you would need to reach out and contact us to troubleshoot and resolve whatever issue had caused that. So again, partially accepted transactions could result in a lower payment than what you had requested, but these are fixable. You may not need this, but I do like to just touch on, if you do ever need to return funds to NSF, we offer the ACMS credit or offset Just to reiterate, the transaction total does need to be 0 or greater. We cannot take a net negative ACMS total. And so if you don't have an award for which you can offset that credit against, we would then prefer that you utilize pay.gov, which is an ACH debit process for sending funds back to the government. And then, of course, a check is always an option. It requires more processing time, and it is not considered to be as secure. If you are a first-time pay.gov user, sometimes your bank account will block the ACH debit. And so some banks do require that you whitelist NSF as a valid source for debiting your account, and they may require an identification number. We do include this in our FAQ, but I also put this here on the slide for future reference if this is ever a problem. And with that, I'm going to be wrapping up the introduction to the ACMS payment process. We're going to have a Q&A session, but we did provide some basic contact information here. Your cognizant program director and the grant official will be identified on your notice of award. And there is a general mailbox for the Engines program. And if you do need the grant accountant for your particular institution, you can go to the DFM website here to get the branch contacts. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Florence to kick off the Q&A.
Sure, so this is an open Q&A, and we invite questions in the chat, or if somebody wants to, I think we jump on, that's how we're gonna do it, right, Laura? We're gonna check questions in the chat or otherwise?
You were gonna take questions from the Google Docs, Lawrence.
I am not seeing any questions in the chat. However, we have a couple of questions that we prepared, unless I'm missing those.
I did.
Missing those?
I did see a question that I can jump in and answer. There was a question about the payment
So
discussion.
I wondered if anybody has any questions or concerns about, I think the timeline was something that we really wanted to emphasize, given that it can take up to 20 days. And I was curious if anybody had any interest about if they could submit their report early. So as you might remember, the term and condition as we're envisioning it would require that you submit your interim report for a 6-month period. And what could happen then, you have an advance payment of $250,000, and you might be asking yourself, well, why don't I just submit this in the middle of the month of the 6th month? So that may or may not be possible. We want to allow for some flexibility, but that also poses some challenges on the NSF side. So we're going to say that if you have that interest or there's an issue that you think requires an early submittal, that you contact the cognizant program officer and the grants officer and have that discussion. But going into this, we are not expecting that we would permit early submissions of those interim reports. And we do have some Q&A now, so it's starting to come up. Justin, you want to take this one on subawards?
Actually, there was one that was flagged as answered that I wanted to go ahead and answer first. There was a question concerning, will there be 250,000 payments after each interim report that is triggered based on the delivery of the interim report? Or is there an expectation for a series of smaller payments that will be triggered independent from the interim reports being filed? So the thing I wanted to clarify is none of the payments are triggered automatically out of NSF. What will happen when you submit the interim report and it is approved, the award threshold within ACMS will be updated to reflect that the funds are now available. It is up to you or your organization to go into ACMS and actually initiate that payment request after the award threshold has been updated. It will not be an automatic trigger. There was another question that had been flagged, and I'm not sure, Florence, if you want to take this, but it says, will we have templates for the interim reports?
There'll be a consistent format that will be discussed with the program officers. There's some limitations with the paperwork reduction office, so we can't use forms, but we do anticipate that the look and feel of those interim reports will be consistent across the Engines program.
Now going to the subaward question, Florence, how the ACMS platform will be used for managing subawards. So it's an organization's responsibility if their award has an approved subaward to manage that outside or within their own systems. And any amounts that you're claiming as expenditures from reimbursement of subaward invoices will simply be included as part of your own payment request. And so since these are being managed as advance payments, you will likely already have those funds on hand to fulfill those reimbursements to the subs. I guess I'll just add one more detail to that. We do not collect expenditure line level details through ACMS. So we're not collecting the fact that the money was spent on salaries or employee related expenses or supplies or subawards directly within ACMS, but we do have an expectation that you maintain that level of detail within your own organization in the event that your award is selected for additional review.
Justin, it looks like many of these are related specifically to your area of expertise. So how can we save our institution account numbers for each grant? Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so your own institution account numbers for each grant, that's that optional recipient account number field within the transaction where you can save that crosswalk between the NSF award ID and what you maintain as your own account number.
So there's a question about the award notice and how will it look any different than the other NSF notice? So question about when those award notices will be released. Do we have our DAX colleagues on? I think they were going to take this question. Do we have Jennifer or Ben on the phone? We don't, but since we talked about it, I'll take it.
Hi, Florence, I'm on, but yeah, do you want to go ahead and start?
No, go ahead, Jennifer. Is that you?
Yeah, am I not showing up? Sorry, yeah, I am on. Can you repeat the question?
The question is, when can we expect the award notice? And will it look any different than the other NSF awards?
So I think we're looking to make our decisions sometime during the month of May, hopefully, but obviously, you know, the internal processes and time frames may switch a little as things fluctuate. And then in terms of the actual notice, I don't know, Ben, do you have any insight into that?
Notices in the award document. The award will look largely similar to how other NSF awards appear.
Thank you. The next couple, Justin, are for you. There's some questions about time limits. When the payment request is submitted, are there time limits? Either, I think somebody even suggested maybe 30 to 45 days.
There is not an official time limit for when you are required to go in and request that payment. Obviously, it will be, we encourage you to not necessarily delay too long, but within the project period of performance, there are no hard and fast time limits. Once the funds have been made available, you are permitted to take those payments as you require them. Once the award has financially closed, that's when certain time limits are then enacted, and there could be restrictions on how long those funds would be remaining available for adjustment.
So I have another question about the payments, and given that payments are milestone or advance payments, are they subject to interest?
Florence, do you think you guys are anticipating putting a term and condition in the award notice indicating that advance payments need to be put in an interest-bearing account? I don't know if you want to confirm that or Jennifer confirm that.
I think it's a general, it's a standard CAFATC, so
Yeah.
I think the answer is yes.
But in general, advanced federal payments in most cases are required to be placed into an interest-bearing account, and then there are requirements to remit interest that has been earned that exceeds a certain threshold, and that threshold is generally to reflect the administrative burden of monitoring that, and I think it's currently a $500 threshold.
So Justin, I don't think I heard, I may have missed this when I was working on my sound, but this relates to the expiration of the SAMS account. And upon delayed payments, when they're waiting for their SAMs to certify, is the payments on a regular timeline for payment, the 15 to 20 days after we submit our new SAMs registration? Not quite a sort of following.
So the regular timeline that we talked about is unrelated to the SAM registration issue. That's the general timeline of you submit the organization submitting the interim progress report for it to be reviewed and approved, the threshold to be updated, and then the payment request to be submitted and processed. It will not be flagged for hold until we process it. So near the end of that general timeline that I was displaying, that is when we have a system control in place that will check for an active SAM registration, and if that SAM registration is expired, it will be held. And what that means is you will have gone through that entire process up to that point, but we will not be able to transmit that payment to Treasury for disbursement until the SAM registration issue is resolved. We will hold that payment until the SAM registration is resolved, and so it's really up to the organization and how quickly they address that issue on how long it takes. In general, if they act upon it the same day, the payment can be released in 3 to 5 business days. It does take a couple of days for the SAM activation to take effect and then be communicated through our system. But in general, that can be 3 to 5 business days. Unfortunately, there have been some organizations that take 6 to 9 months to update their SAM registration. There isn't much we can do about that. So it's really up to the organization to be proactive in maintaining that and taking timely action to resolve an issue if they let it lapse.
So we have one related to the program, and this is a good one. And it says, implied in the payment structure is that expenses will be incurred at the rate of $250,000 for 6 months. Is there flexibility to accommodate expenses that may be incurred on an accelerated schedule or faster than the $250K per 6 months? And this is a conversation we would want you to have with the Cognizant Program Director and the Grants and Agreements officials. So I don't think NSF is prepared to make a blanket statement that says, yes, it will actually release funds. I think there's a lot of factors related to this. So we would encourage you to reach out to your program director, the Cognizant Grants and Agreements official, and start to have that conversation. So we believe that we will try to have some flexibility, but it does depend. So we have a question about asking you to elaborate on the advanced payment logistics. Justin, I think this one is, I'm not sure if it's a system question or just a broad one.
Well, so we don't dictate how you're going to maintain the funds in an interest-bearing account. That's really up to each organization to have a business process for. So simply the expectation is that the funds are deposited in an interest-bearing account and that you're able to track any interest that is earned in association with those federal funds. There's a lot of best practices out there in the industry, I believe, but we do not dictate or prescribe a specific way of doing that.
Thank you. I don't think this next one is a question. It's really a statement, but I'm going to read this and then ask if the AGA wants to weigh in on this. We received an email stating the awards will be released by NSF on May 10th at 3 p.m. ET, with an announcement being made on May 11th at 10 a.m. ET. The AGA, I don't know if you want to add anything to that statement. It doesn't look like there's actually a question, just a statement.
So actually, the awards will be made. So you'll be receiving notices from our NSF awards will be made. So anyone searching or databases to verify this may be able to find it on the 10th of May. But the actual announcement, the press releases will be issued and NSF will make a public push. Awards would be on the 11th. So the PR embargo, you can talk about the awards that you received is until May 11th. So after 10 a.m. when NSF releases it, so 11 a.m. you can go ahead and issue one press releases, make your website public. So it's important for you to be aware of the difference. So you can start advertising it widely. You know, the project team be on May 11th after the embargo is ended. You will receive communications from NSF before that saying that the award is official. But that doesn't mean you can go ahead and start speaking about it right away. So that's the most important thing.
I'm not sure. Did anybody else have trouble with the sound, or was that just me? Justin, were you having a hard time hearing that as well? Theag, I don't know if you, I'm sorry to ask you to do that, but your sound was quite garbled. I wondered if you could just summarize that in a nutshell again for us.
Yeah, I have a connection issue. Can you hear me better now?
When you started, maybe what we could do, Theag, maybe I'll switch to another question and give you a minute if you need to. I don't know if that's going to help at all, but it started out okay. Let me switch to another question. I'll come back to that because there is another question about the awards and when the start date will be. So I think the statement and your follow-up is actually related to that as well. Let's see. Let me try this one. Is there any reporting requirement after refund of a closed-out grant? Justin, in the system.
So I think I'll kind of address both of these questions. There's another question that says, do we need to provide a detailed accounting of expenditures at the conclusion of the 2-year period? So we do not require detailed financial reporting as a component of reporting what your expenditures were with the ACMS transaction submission. However, the terms and conditions do require that you keep a detailed accounting of your expenditures. If your award is selected for additional monitoring, if it's selected for any kind of audit or transaction testing, the expectation is that you would be able to produce a cost ledger, detailed expense receipts or support for any of those expenditures that you spent the funds on. And so there is a requirement for you to maintain that documentation for a certain amount of time after the award has closed out to support that type of audit and oversight function. We do not collect that on a proactive basis for every single award. And so awards are simply monitored through a selection process or a sampling process.
Thank you, Justin. I'm going to switch back to Thiago again, see if we can get, he's had a chance on his sound. I don't know if there's anything we can do with that.
Can you hear me better?
Yes, that's much better. Thank you.
Okay, I think the summary was, please respect the embargo date, and any public communication to anyone outside the team should happen only after May 11th at 10 a.m. We may issue the award before. You may get a letter from NSF saying the award has been made, but that does not mean you can go ahead and talk to anyone else. Please wait until the embargo is lifted on May 11th before you communicate with others. Did that come across clearly, Lawrence?
Yes, I think so. So we have another question is related to the award start date. And maybe this is a joint question for you, Thiago, and Jennifer and Ben. It says, is the award start date the same as the May 10th or 11th date? Or can it be assigned as a later date?
The award start date is May 15th. And I believe Jennifer can correct me if there's going to be change to that, but it's not the same as announcement.
Correct. Yeah, that's correct. The start date we're anticipating to be May 15th. So even if the award date is earlier or even later, the start date will still be the 15th.
Great. We have a question about what triggers the advance payment, and when can the organization expect to receive that? Ben, Jennifer, you want to take that, or would you like me to?
I can.
Or Justin, yes, if you want to.
I can chime in on that again. It's basically reiterating the topic of the payment timeline. So let me kind of restate this in different phrasing. NSF is not going to initiate the payment automatically. Once the award has been issued and the award is made available in ACMS, a threshold will be placed on the award limiting your first payment request to be up to that first advance payment amount. It is the organization's responsibility to trigger that payment request. So an individual who has been assigned ACMS user permissions would need to access the award cash management service system, create that payment transaction, and submit it and certify it. Once that has been submitted, that will then initiate the disbursement of those funds to your bank account.
Okay, so we have another one related to the award and this award start and then related expenses. So does this mean that only expenses incurred after May 15th can be included in the report used for payment justification?
I think that's a question for Jennifer.
So I think I know the answer, but I would prefer to defer to someone else since I'm not an expert on cooperative agreement payments. If there's someone else that can answer this better.
Yeah, I'm looking for the question. It disappeared there for a minute. I think the person is asking, does the award start date, oh, it disappeared on me. Interesting, that one went away. So I thought they were asking about expenses that were incurred prior to the 15th date.
Yeah, they're asking if pre-award spending is
Yes,
allowed.
that's exactly where I was headed. So you can incur pre-award cost, but you do that at risk.
Yeah, and that was my understanding, but I wasn't 100% sure, so didn't want to speak on that.
Great. And I've lost the question. Otherwise, I would double check to see that we actually answered it, but we can probably get that back again. When will we get the ACMS login information? On May 15th?
So if you're a first-time grant recipient, you may be able to assign ACMS user permissions now. I would recommend that you take a look at the About Account Management information page to get the help documents on how to add and approve user permissions, and attempt to add those user permissions to an appropriate person at your organization. If your institution has not been set up in our financial system yet because it's too early in the awarding process, it may be that your organization has not been flagged as being ACMS eligible yet, because not every institution that submits a proposal is automatically granted access to ACMS if their award is not issued. So you may, if you can't successfully add ACMS user permissions today, once you receive that notice of award, you should be able to then assign ACMS permissions at that time at a minimum. But if you do have any problems, you can contact the help desk and they can help you walk you through addressing any user permission issues.
Jennifer, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I know you did some work with the financial system to set up these new institutions. Anything you want to add? I don't know if it was part of the setup is to check it as ACMS eligible.
No, I don't think I have anything to add, but I will make sure that I've double checked them all to ensure that that box is checked.
Fantastic. But what I'm hearing, Justin, is at minimum entities that are their first time users should check the research.gov page, start looking at that account management, making themselves familiar with it, and even maybe give it a try and not wait until. Fantastic.
And I going through your own business process at your organization and identifying who's going to be responsible for submitting those ACMS transactions. Typically somebody performing a financial management role.
So we have one again related to the start date of May 15th, asking about, I think, negotiations. So does the award start date of May 15th hold true, even if the cooperative agreement has not been signed by May 15th? So I think they're asking about this period of negotiations, and that has to happen prior to the award start date. So Jennifer, Ben, do you want to comment on that?
Are they asking if the start date, are they asking to negotiate a later start date? Is that what the question is?
No, they're asking about, we anticipate that the start date of awards will be May 15th, but if the cooperative agreement has not been signed, AKA it hasn't been negotiated and signed by May 15th, will the start date still remain?
Yeah, we're still expecting a May 15th start date, even in the event that something isn't signed and executed before then.
Okay. We still have, I think, how much time do we have? We have until 2:30 or 2?
We have until 2:30.
Okay, we have plenty of time for Q&A, and we left ourselves plenty of time because we really do want to shake out any questions that attendees might have. So no matter how detailed, please share those with us. I think this one, we've answered this one. Is the award start date the same as the May 10th or 11th date, or can be assigned? It is different. The award start date is different than the announcement date. Here's one. Hi, even though there are advanced payments and payments based on deliverables, this is an award based on reimbursement, not a fixed fee agreement, correct? Ben, Jennifer?
That's correct. This is still a reimbursement-based award.
Thank you. Any other questions? We have another one. So, with respect to the embargo, but when is it realistic to expect to see the award letters in terms and conditions? Jennifer and Ben.
Soon, potentially this week or next week.
Do you anticipate Ben sending perhaps the terms and conditions out prior to the actual award letters, or are you going to hold on those until the actual cooperative agreement is negotiated?
No, we wanted to distribute those to the entities prior.
Great. So this week or early next week, then I guess recipients should expect to see an email with the draft T's and C's. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's the part of the question I was more focused on.
Yep. And then the award letters, of course, will come concurrent with when the award is made. There's another one, I think it's related to this last one. It's phrased slightly differently, but I think it is the same. The attendee could let us know, but when will we receive the cooperative agreement? I think they're specifically asking about when will they receive the details in that, which is are the T's and C's and the total award amount. And it sounds like they'll get copies, everyone will get copies of the draft T's and C's coming up this week. And sometime in mid-May, they expect to see awards made. But the attendee, please let us know if we've answered your question. So we still have time. We have no open questions. We can offer up a couple of tips if you'd like, since we have a bit of time, if individuals are interested in, if you do have a delay or problem with your payment, we do suggest that you start with your institution point of contact. And then subsequent to that, if you still can't figure that, please reach out to the Cognizant Program Officer, copy the Grants and Agreements Officer, and the Engines email. And that'll assure that everybody is on the same page and that we can put our attention on it. Okay, we have another question. Will some of the potential awardees end up receiving notice of no award? Ben and Jennifer.
Yes, I think that is a fair assessment. Not everyone will get an award. So at some point you will receive a notification if you are not a successful awardee in this particular requirement.
Thank you.
Can I weigh in there, Florence?
Yes, absolutely, Thiago, please do.
Yeah, again, until DAX officially issues the award letter, we are still in the process of conducting due diligence. So even though you have been part of the process for this long, we have always reminded you that this is still a potential, you are a potential awardee. It's not yet confirmed until all the due diligence has been done, until DAX officially issues the award letter. So there is a small but real chance that some of you may not receive the award. This is the reason why we are insisting that you do not go ahead and start sharing this news with anyone. Please consider that, keep that in mind.
And then also, I guess I just want to add, not every award will necessarily be made on the same day. So if you do hear that someone got an award and you haven't heard yet, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have not received an award. So just kind of keep waiting and seeing.
So we have another question. This relates to pre-award, incurring pre-award expenses and cost, and says you probably covered this earlier. 15 May is the start date. Is there a pre-award period which some expenses could be billed during? Question mark. Jennifer, Ben.
So the uniform guidance permits pre-award costs being incurred that are otherwise allowable. There's nothing that I can see in the terms in the draft terms and conditions of the award or in the solicitation that would preclude pre-award costs from being incurred. So it's a very roundabout way of saying that they're not prohibited.
Thank you, Ben. I think we usually add, right, it's at your institution's risk. So there's nothing precluding you from doing that, but those still need to be approved, reviewed by NSF. But any other questions? Really good ones. We still have a half an hour. So you have a captive audience with, you can see with BFA staff from DFM and DAX, as well as key representatives from the division and the Engines program. So any other questions? It can be small. I think Justin is very familiar with the system. If you want to ask something very, very specific, that's encouraged. Justin, maybe I could pick your brain as well as Jennifer's and Ben's. Do you guys want to add anything, maybe best practices that go beyond what we talked about today that you want the attendees to just be mindful of?
I can add something. So there are 3 primary points of contact that you have for asking questions. You have your program director, you have your grants official or cooperative agreements official, and you have your DFM financial point of contact. We often each day field questions directed at one of those 3 points of contact that is actually better addressed towards another one. And so just kind of having an understanding of the type of question you're asking and which of those 3 points of contact is best directed at. So programmatic or technical questions or any questions relating to the reporting are going to be best directed at your program director. If it's a specific allowability question related to the terms and conditions or the cooperative agreement itself, it's probably best to address that to your grants and agreements official. If it's related to ACMS payment processing or the submission of a transaction or why your payment might be delayed, it's best directed at the DFM point of contact. And so just having a good understanding of those different roles within NSF and those different points of contact that you have at your disposal will help get you the answers to your questions in a more timely fashion.
Thank you, Justin. That's excellent advice. And I would add, if you're not sure, copy all 3 and we'll talk to each other. Ben and Jennifer, did you want to add anything above and beyond what we've been talking about with regard to best practices?
I don't think I have anything else. Ben, do you have anything?
No, I'm good.
Okay, we have 2 other questions that have come in, and one is really good and says, for first-time awardees, it's very difficult to have specific questions without having seen or used the platform. Will there be another webinar to follow up once we're all set up with the award? If not, please consider this a request for one. So I will say that we did talk about this because there was a whole host of very detailed information that Justin and I looked at, and we just didn't have enough time to squeeze it in the 30 minutes. So we talked about potentially coming back to perhaps a mid-award, another webinar mid-award period. The other resource you have at your disposal is, and Justin, correct me if this is wrong, but your team does a whole host of sessions at like NCURA and some of the big award grants administration conferences. So your questions aren't, if they're very generic about ACMS, or not restricted to these webinars. Is that right, Justin?
That's right. And we do an annual critical dates webinar each year, and we post that recording on our website. But really the grant accountant points of contact, which are assigned by the state within the state that your organization finds itself within, they're there and available to provide customer service with regards to the use of ACMS. So if you get into it for the first time and you're having issues navigating the system or accessing a particular report, you're welcome to reach out to that grant accountant assigned to your state, and they can help provide you additional support in using the system for the first time.
Great, but and to follow up, yes, we will consider having another one. We'll talk to our colleagues at NSF. We have a couple more coming in. Here's one. I'm not sure I've heard it confirmed that if this presentation will be viewable later. Could be helpful for sharing with others involved in the payment process. And the answer is yes, it's being recorded. And Laura, you may know where this will be posted. Do you know where this will be posted?
I believe the comms team has to approve it for 508 compliance, and then it will be emailed out to the folks that were invited.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll make it 508 compliant and distribute it via email. We have one about the proposal submission process related to the budget and a more detailed breakdown of the anticipated expenditures. It seems to me to be more a little bit centric on the proposals, but if we need to elect to change how we spend the award funds up to the total award limit, what approvals and steps are required to review and approve these types of changes? Jennifer and Ben.
It would depend on the amount of the budget that they're trying to adjust. I believe the PAPG does provide some guidance with respect to how much of the budget can be shifted around. Additionally, if there are any costs related to subcontractors that are adjusted, post-award, regardless of the size, that does require prior approval.
So first stop is always NSF PAPPG. As Ben saying, it speaks specifically to what kind of changes can be done without NSF approval, and then it gives you guidance on subsequent approvals. Typically, you can never lose out by talking to your cognizant grants officer and program officer. That'll always help inform questions like these. We have another one, a request in addition to the video, they'd like copies of the slides as well. And we can do that, no problem, right?
Yep.
Yes. And Justin, I think you mentioned something in passing, if others maybe didn't hear it, but you've got other videos, kind of more generic in-depth videos on the DFM site as well, right? And that's been referenced in your deck.
That's right. We record our webinars that we produce and make those available on our website each year. And we do a critical dates end of year webinar that's heavily focused on canceling appropriations and just the end of year impacts. And we also do a program income webinar that gets into the details of the submission of that report.
Thank you. Any other questions? Again, we have, looks like 20 minutes. I'll turn to my NSF colleagues and ask if they would like to raise a question or add to the dialogue on things that we haven't covered that you guys think would be very helpful for the attendees to hear. So I've been going through looking at, I had a couple of, I'm going to give it a last pass of some questions that we put together just in case we didn't hear something that we thought somebody might raise. I think we've covered some of these, but give me a minute. So we did cover the timeline, reiterating it could take up to 3 weeks from the time that you submit your interim report. If you have concerns that this may create financial stresses or concerns, definitely reach out to your cognizant program director, the grants and agreements record officer, and that you can have that conversation.
Can I just weigh in on that? This is the reason why we are asking everyone to run the reports in 30 days before the actual due, to give us the time to review and get the money out the door. So by the time the particular quarter ends, you have the funding released. So if you can do your part, submit the reports within the 30-day period, before the end of the 30-day period, we can make sure that the funding is up and ready for you to use at the turn of the quarter, next quarter.
Thanks, Diego. Your sound was a little garbled, but I caught the end of that. I think in a nutshell, you're reiterating that it takes both of us to get this done. And if they're able, attendees or the recipients do their part and get the interim reports submitted on time, we'll do our part and process those, review those reports, and process the payments.
Thank you.
Swiftly. Yeah. So we have a question about some examples, even hypothetical. This relates to an organization that might be declined due to due diligence. So this relates to, I think, Jennifer and Diaga's comment, and found that there's a number of processes that go on behind the scenes with NSF to assure we've done our due diligence. And what might be some examples of things, if you have any on hand, that would cause an organization to be declined? Do you have any that you want to offer up? I mean, I can come up with something that's a little exaggerated. Jennifer or Ben, do you have anything you want to offer up?
If an institution has had awards canceled by the government, that is a risk factor that is considered. Significant audit findings are also considered.
Those are good ones. Ben, I was just going to add something maybe wouldn't cause an organization to be declined, but certainly there could be some problems if there's significant number of proposed costs that are unallowable, right? It may not cause the award to be declined, but it could significantly change the nature of it. And perhaps depending upon the amount, could encourage NSF to reconsider the award overall. I don't know if that's helpful from the attendee who asked the question. Any other questions? We're here. We left our afternoon opened. We have 15 minutes. You have our attention. Any more questions? So we have about 15 minutes left, and I think we run through all the questions, even some ones that we had put together. So I want to thank everybody who has attended, and the questions you've asked are very, very good ones. It shows that not only are you listening to what we have, but also are really interested in the next step. So please don't hesitate to stay in contact. You have the Engines mailbox, engines@nsf.gov. You have all of our points of contact. I think just to put those at the end of his slide deck, and then Laura will be distributing the slides and the video once the video has been made 508 compliant. So thank you very much. We're going to give you 15 minutes back to your afternoon. Really appreciate your attendance. Thanks again.